I don't know when you want to start the Zoom.
I just started it.
Okay.
So I'm trying to, yeah, people are having trouble with the link, so
I'm
people
going to
got
come
it.
up. Then Mom's going to come up and just kind of like pass the basket.
Okay.
Prayer, that kind of stuff. So,
Okay.
all right.
Cool.
And Michael can decide how you want to do it.
Yep.
All right. Let me know when you're ready, because I think we're ready when you're ready.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is like, for sure. Having trouble doing
Danny was trying to log in and couldn't get logged in, so I just signed out and resent the link to everybody. So
See if
I'm
you
watching.
can, oh, you're in now.
Yeah, I'm
Now you're
in.
just
I
waiting
just
for
gotta-
login people.
Hey, I just sent it. And I sent it to you and to Danny and to Katie. So tell him to try with it. We're on, but I don't see him or you or Katie yet. But it is recording too. Okay, there's Katie.
Hi, Katie.
Okay.
She has a still photo though.
Yeah, she'll keep her camera off, I'm sure. So, okay, Katie's in, so you and Danny should be able to get in now. Okay. All right, sweetie. Yeah, I sent it to you.
But somebody has to let everybody in.
Actually, it just let it in, so
So it's
we
gonna
didn't
do it
have to admit, so
automatically?
it should do it automatically. But I'll get up and check in between the things that they're doing to make
Make
sure that
sure
we're
it's
good.
working.
Yep. Okay, all right, guys.
Hey, good. My name is Jenny.
Jenny?
Yes.
I know. Doesn't mean I would.
Good evening, everybody. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes, give everybody a chance to get their seat. I'm Curtis, and I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic.
Hey, Curtis.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the Alano Club. It's a great event tonight. It's beautiful weather. It's a little chilly. I see some brought blankets, so great idea. But this is the normal Climb to Safety group meeting. I want to thank them for allowing this slot to be utilized for our speaker tonight. But we do want to do a little bit of the Climb to Safety business and pass the basket, things like that. But before we get started, let's have a little silent meditation followed by the Serenity Prayer. Prayer.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the will to know the difference.
All right. We'll go ahead and pass the basket around. If y'all don't mind, just let it filter through the crowd. Also, just a reminder for those of y'all tonight, we still have our regularly scheduled Hoot Owl meeting tonight at 10. So hope you can hang out and join us for that. It's a great group. But prior to that, directly after Mike speaks, I think there's a game on tonight. Is that correct? Anybody heard about that? But there is going to be some pizza and refreshments afterwards. And of course, we've got our TVs in the parlor. You're welcome to stick around, have some pizza, fellowship, watch the game if you like, or just hang out on the deck and just visit with our brothers and sisters in AA. All right. As soon as that basket gets back, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rob, and he's going to introduce our guest speaker for the evening.
My name's Rob. I'm an alcoholic. And I want to thank Climb to Safety, too, for giving us this time slot. We don't know when we might get to see Mike again. A lot of things about Mike I've always admired. And, well, I remember back, many of you know that I had a sponsor, Bill McKee, and he died. and I was distraught. And I kept, in my mind, I was thinking, okay, Rob, you need to get a new sponsor. And it's going through names in my mind, and Mike's name kept coming up. But like the typical alcoholic, I was thinking, he doesn't have time for me. So I let that go on for about a week or two, and finally I called him up and said, Mike, will you sponsor me? He said, sure, I think we'll be a great fit, much to my relief. And I admire the guy. I've seen him go through some tough times and handle it as I would hope I would handle it. And glad we get to hear from him tonight. So it's all yours, Mike.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Bennett. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Rob. It's been a pleasure to be your sponsor. And thanks for not calling. It's funny, if you're new and you feel like, I don't want to call my sponsor because I don't want to bother him, and I don't want to, he probably doesn't have time, and, you know, he's too busy, and I don't want to be a bothering. Let me tell you something. Some years ago, a lot of you guys know that, but some years ago, my youngest son was brutally murdered right here in Mobile at the University of South Alabama. As I was trying to deal with that situation, I wasn't getting any phone calls from the people I was sponsoring. And finally, we were in my garage under my house, and I was writing his eulogy because I didn't trust anybody else to say anything about my son. He was my son, and I was going to deliver his eulogy. And I was writing it, and Danny, who's on Zoom here, hey, Danny, and a bunch of people from Mobile were there that I was sponsoring. And I said to them, and I was crying, you know, trying to write this thing and regain my composure. But there's so much love in that room. And we had a whole garage full of people. Rob may have been there. I don't remember if he was or not. But I said, how come you guys haven't been calling me? And they all said the same thing. Well, man, you're going through a lot. And I just don't want to bother you. And I said, well, you're a bunch of selfish son of bitches. And I meant that. Because what I needed right then was not to be left alone. What I needed was everybody calling and doing what they were supposed to be doing so I could focus on my recovery and I could focus on staying sober. And so nobody missed any calls after that. They started calling, and they probably saved my life. So if you're new and you feel like, I don't want to bother my sponsor, you just hear those words ring in your ears that Bennett said, you selfish son of a bitch. Because I'll promise you, every sponsor that's ever sponsored anybody, as some of you new people will feel the same way one day. Anyways, we have that out of the way. So this podium is a little rickety here, and they've set the laptop on top so it can see me. Problem is, if I touch the podium, the screen goes all like that, so I'm going to have to not touch the podium. I've spoken on some Zoom meetings in the last year, which are just dismal. If you've ever been asked to speak on Zoom, my old sponsor used to tell me that some meetings lack so much enthusiasm that it's like talking to a painting. And I used to think that was funny. And I spoke at some meetings that were real small. It was like talking to a painting. But when you're talking on Zoom, especially if they have a black screen where they don't let you see them, or if they have a still picture like Katie, and I'd wave at Katie, but I don't know if she's even there. She may be in the bathroom by now. But just a still photo, and you have like 12 people, and like 9 of them have either blacked out or still photos. It is literally like talking to a painting, and it's the most unfriendly environment at all. Give a talk to. But anyway, so it's nice to be in front of some live people. So my sobriety date is January 26, 1992. So to save the math, I have 1 year more sober than Chris. And I did tell him when I sat next to him, it was nice to see newer people like him staying active. Anyway, so I got sober 28 years ago, and if I don't screw it up or die by January 26, I'll have 29 years, which may not impress you, some of you, but it impresses the shit out of me. Because a guy like me should not be standing here sober at any length of time, especially the length of time I've had. And it's been really wonderful to be part of Alcoholics Anonymous for all this time and make so many friends. I came early because I wanted to visit with all the people that I knew from here. I got sober up in Washington State in 1992 because I came from Arizona. I lived in Arizona all my life, and I moved to Washington State to dodge alimony and child support responsibility that I had from my first wife. And when I got up there, a few years after I got there, I got sober. I didn't mean to get sober, and I didn't want to get sober, but I wound up, my life got so bad that I needed to get sober. So I quit drinking. I had stopped drinking forever for maybe, I don't know, 8 or 9 times in my life. I was just going to stop drinking forever, and it never lasted. And this last time was a little interesting. I spent a lot of my early years drinking with another guy, and he quit drinking. And he went to a treatment center, and he got sober and stayed sober for a little while, going to AA meetings, and then eventually he started drinking again. And then he went to another treatment center after he got in some trouble, and he started drinking. I haven't seen you in a long time. Not you, him. I just met you, and it was nice meeting you, and your name is Jenny. I did forget. I mean, I didn't forget. I did remember. Anyways, so he got sober again after another treatment center. He went to AA for a while, and then he got drunk again. And the whole time I'm drinking, and I'm being around him, and I don't have the common decency to stop trying to get him to drink with me. I didn't understand alcoholism or what was wrong with him or me. So I kept telling him, why can't you just have one drink or have a couple beers and quit acting like an idiot? He couldn't explain it to me because he didn't understand it either, even though he had been through treatment and he had gotten sober a few times. He had no idea what was wrong with him. I had no idea what was wrong with him or me. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. We were testing this earlier, and my hearing's so bad, I just can't hardly hear it. So anyway, so finally, I moved to Washington to get out of my responsibility, I thought, for child support and alimony. And it turns out you don't really get away from that. But I went as far as I thought I could get from it. And I was there maybe about 3 years, and drinking had gotten really bad for me at that time. I had drank bad all my life. I started out when I was a kid huffing paint when I was 9 years old in school. And I didn't mean to, but some kid walked up to me with the sock balled up, and he said, "Here, breathe this in." And I did, because I didn't know what he was doing. So I just breathed it in, and I got high and wandered around in school for a while, and I got in trouble with the administrative people and got suspended, and nobody really knew what was going on with me. And I didn't tell them, but they knew I was high, so they suspended me. I was about 9 years old. And then as soon as I got back to school, I looked for that kid, and I wanted to do that again. And then not very long after that. Now, I had drank a few times since then. I think I had my first drink when I was around 5 or 6 years old. My mother used to drink slow gin and 7-Up, which may sound disgusting to some of you, but as a little kid, it made slow gin kind of tasty. So I didn't have any trouble drinking it. But I didn't get drunk at 5 or 6 years old and have this magic feeling and then get married and divorced 25 times and wind up in blackouts up in Canada. I was just a little kid, and I drank, and I just got a little silly and sleepy, and I didn't think much about it. But I drank a couple of times after that. Do I have to let somebody in here? I'm also the host, as it turns out. I just heard something beep. All right. They're supposed to be let in automatically. So anyway, so I had drank a few times before then, but it wasn't anything real serious. One time I was mowing this lady's yard, and when I got done, she paid me my $5 or whatever. I had one of them push lawnmowers that had no motor. The blades just turned when you pushed it. And I'd shove that around the neighborhood trying to mow some grass for just spending money. But she paid me, and then she poured a Schlitz malt liquor beer into a glass, half full, and then she poured grape soda on it. So I don't know, I was drinking all these mixed drinks. And I thought it just ruined the grape soda, because even today, Schlitz malt liquor beer, that's the worst thing in the world you can drink. But you add a little grape soda and you can choke it down. But I remember feeling like that just ruined the grape soda, because I was a little kid. And so I didn't start drinking serious again until I was about 11 or 12. I took some time off. But in between, I helped a little paint. I smoked some weed. There was some guy on the back of the playground that was selling joints for 50 cents, and I found out about that, and that was kind of fun. And later on, I found out that if you're new and you're not ready to really quit drinking completely, I have found out that smoking weed is one of the best solutions to out drinking that I ever found, because I could stay sober for a long time if I baked out of my mind every day. But eventually, that would run me into trouble, and then I'd have to start drinking again to get off of it. And I tried it 2 or 3 times like that. But so I was a little kid, and I smoked weed for a little while, and then I was about 12 years old, and I got in so much trouble in Phoenix. I was in and out of the foster care system from the time I can remember. My earliest memory was somebody taking me, well, I was at this house that I didn't know anybody, holding my brother's hand. We went up the stairs and we're on this top deck. And I asked my brother, what are we doing here? And he said, don't worry, just stay with me. And he's holding my hand. He said, just stay with me. He's a couple years older than me. And he said, we'll be okay. And our life just went like that. We'd be home with our parents for some period of months, maybe a year, I don't know. But then they'd get in trouble with the law, and CPS would come in, Child Protective Services, and they would whisk us off again, or we would get in trouble doing something we weren't supposed to and wind up in juvie down in South Phoenix. That's where I grew up, in Phoenix, Arizona. He wound up in a boys' home 2 different times as we were kids for 6 to 9 months at a time, you know, locked up in like a boys' ranch. And I just wound up in and out of Durango Juvenile Detention Center. I remember I've always said that I only went to jail 1 time in my life, and not long ago, my wife and I flew back into Phoenix, and we were trying to navigate down the freeway to get north home a couple hours where we live, and the freeway was jammed up. So I knew that area. I grew up down there. So I just got off and went the back streets, and I was going to circle around the traffic jam and jump back on the freeway. And I told my wife, I said, that's Durango Juvenile Detention Center there. She says, well, how do you know that? I said, I spent a little time over there, so I was familiar with it. And she said, I thought you only went to jail once. And I said, I did. She said, well, how many times were you there? And I said, oh, I don't know, a bunch. I have no idea. She said, when they locked you up in there, could you just leave? And I said, oh, no, you were locked up in like steel doors and thick glass. And she said, well, you know, that's jail, don't you? I said, no, not really, you know, it's just for kids. And she said, it's still jail. They don't let you out, it's jail. So anyways, I was in there a bunch of times. So I guess I was in jail more than I thought. But about 12 years old, they finally, I'd been in so much trouble, my mother and dad finally got us back out of the system. And they skipped town with us, and we moved north a couple hours to the area that I live in now. And my dad did that because he knew we would wind up dead or in prison if he left us in the city. Because when my brother, a couple years older than me, he was already probably a full-on little gangster. I mean, he was running around with this organized gang down there, and they were robbing people and stealing stuff and breaking into cars. And I don't know what all they were doing, probably selling dope. And I was just a little hanger-on. You know, I was hung around with my brother, and when they got into something serious, they'd always send me home. And on the way home, I couldn't seem to get home without doing something wrong. So anyways, we went in a lot of trouble. And my brother, he never did find what I was fortunate enough to find. And he wound up becoming a full patch criminal biker for most of his adult life. And not so many years ago, 8 or 10 years ago, he finally got out of that lifestyle and met a woman and got married and settled down and started going to church. And I mean, it was really an amazing, what looked like an amazing transformation in his life. But a couple of years ago, he showed up at my door, on my doorstep in Arizona, and he had ran away from home. I don't know what he did, and he wouldn't tell me what he did. But he showed up at my house at at my job about 8 o'clock in the morning, and he said, I need a place to stay. And I said, well, what did happen to your wife and your house and everything? He said, well, I just got tired of being married, so I just loaded all of my stuff up and left. And I said, well, does she know? And he said, no. There's somebody doing something here. I don't know what that is. There, I got it. You're good. So anyways, I said, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, I said, does your wife know where you are? And he said, no, and if she calls, I'd appreciate it if you don't tell her. And I said, well, no, it's not the way you're supposed to live. And he said, can I stay at your house? And I said, no. If my wife finds out that you ran away from home and left your wife and you didn't tell her where you are, I promise you and I'll both not be living in my house. So that ain't happening. I don't know what you got to do to fix whatever trouble you're in, but you're not doing it in my house. And so he left and did whatever he did. And we stayed in touch for about a year. And finally, he just quit talking to me because I didn't bail him out and do whatever he do. But I don't feel bad about that today because I didn't cause his problems. I didn't cause the trouble he was in, and I didn't cause him to have to escape from it in the middle of the night, and I am damn sure not responsible for saving him out of his problems because that's not what we do in our life. So anyways, I wound up at 12 years old going into permanent foster care near the town I live in now, and they tried to take him in, but he kept stealing from them. And finally they said, you know, this is just too much, and we can't have you here. And I was so afraid. These people just fell in love with me, and I don't know why, but they absolutely fell in love with me. And I was so afraid of not only, I would never steal from them because I was afraid that they wouldn't let me stay and I wouldn't lie to them. And even later when I started drinking heavy, I wouldn't drink around them because I was afraid if they saw the way I was really drinking, they wouldn't love me anymore. And so they became my parents. And they got me into, they let me finish 8th grade up there where they lived. And then I worked at a little ranch during the summer, which kind of different from being a little city shit, you know, and gangbanger hang around and then going north and getting on this ranch and learning about cows and horses and stuff. I'd never seen a horse or cow, you know, just on TV, never seen one live. And within a year, I'm riding horses and being a cowboy and gathering cows and stuff. And it was really a fun life. And I did that until I was in my mid-20s and finally had a horse fall on me and broke my back in 2 places. So I had to give that up. Wind up doing something different for a living. But anyway, so they took me and him both in. He couldn't make the cut, so he just went on and started his life, and it just got worse and worse for him. But I stayed with him, and I got in, after that summer, I got into 9th grade, and about 9 weeks in, they kicked me out of school for violent behavior. That's what was documented. And I wasn't just kicked out of school, I was kicked out of the entire school district. I couldn't even go to school anywhere in the county because of my behavior. And as it turned out, I wasn't a bad kid. I was a scared kid. I didn't know what to do. Growing up in the city and in the system like I did, if somebody poked you in the chest or somebody shoved you or somebody started in on you, you could run and it never got any better. It got worse and worse. Or you could just defend yourself, and whether you win or lost, it wouldn't make any difference. They respected you for standing up for yourself. So I had learned to do that when I got to this school up in this, you know, cowboy country. Well, I was a weird little kid. You could just imagine how I must have looked and acted in school. So everybody was messing with me. So I kept standing up for myself. And I stood up for myself so much they didn't allow it anymore. So I wound up not in school. So turns out, though, this lady that had taken me in foster care, she was a retired educator. So she just homeschooled me. And I'm so lucky for that now because I probably received 10 times the education I would have had I stayed in the public school system. And I could go to work in the summers and the weekends on the ranches, and they had a ranch, and our neighbor ranches I could work. And then I could be there in a very controlled environment. And she was the most loving lady. You could imagine the environment that it must have been like growing up. Some of you did grow up in an environment like I described. But nobody really tried to help me learn about just being a normal, nice person and like a family member. So the first time I met this lady, I went in the restroom at her house there, and when I was done, I did whatever, and I came out, and she went in the restroom, and she kind of inspected it, which I didn't realize that's what she was doing. She kind of inspected it. And she came back, and she took me by the hand, most loving woman in the world. She took me by the hand very gently, and she led me into that little bathroom, and she said, "Michael, what do you see?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a bathroom. I don't know what I'm supposed to look at." And she said, "Well, that towel laying there was folded very neatly and hung on that thing. And there was no water on the sink, that was all dry, and the toilet seat was down and wiped off, clean. And so it's important that you always leave a room the way you found it." And I thought, well, that was very interesting. I'd never had that information before. Thank you. So I took the towel and I cleaned everything and wiped it off and put the toilet lid down, and I folded the towel and put it up. And she gave me a big hug, and she told me how wonderful I was. And that's the way she treated me for the rest of her life. And she died 6 years ago on Mother's Day. And that's the most wonderful love story in the world, that my life with this woman. And she was a grandparent age to me, but she just took care of me and nurtured me all along. And it turns out not only was she an educator, she was an expert in behavioral modification. Who knew that I would fall into an environment like that? Because I needed a little modification in my behavior, I'm quite sure. But all of my childhood growing up, when I would get aggressive with somebody, and I never did with her or with him. He was a wonderful man, just like her, and not as nurturing, but just a great man, a hero of mine. I never misbehaved around them that I was ever aware of. And I say that because sometimes I'm not aware of my behavior, but in my perspective, I was never misbehaving around them. But I would around other people, sometimes in their present. And she would always say to me things like, "Michael, if you would have liked that person's behavior to have gone like this, all you would have had to do is change your behavior from what it was to this, and that would have happened." And she did that over and over and over with me as I grew up. So somewhere, eventually, when I got sober, it was starting to take. I was starting to realize that, you know, I didn't have to engage and I didn't have to stay part of a problem and I didn't have to provoke it. And life started getting a lot easier from there. Now, if you're new, you're trying to figure out what's wrong with you. I get that, because when I finally came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was 26 years old, and I came just confused. I didn't know what the hell was wrong with me. That friend of mine that I had drank with that kept going in and out of AA, eventually, he hung himself to death. And about 4 months before, or 3 months before I got sober, I got word that he had hung himself. And I remember thinking to myself, he lived in my house for a little while, and his behavior had become so odd. He was lying to me, and he didn't need to lie to me. I could see why he lied to his wife, and I could see why he lied to them, but he didn't need to lie to me. I was his friend, and I got it. I drank like he did. He didn't need to lie, but he was still lying to me. And he was hiding stuff in my house. Like, he would drink these beers, and he'd crunch up the cans and hide them in the back of drawers and shit, and then I would find him and think, what the hell is wrong with this guy? This is like behavior that he needs psychiatric care. He doesn't need to quit drinking, and that's what I said to him. And finally threw him out of my house. Well, when I found out he had hung himself, I'm behaving just like he did. I'm lying to people that I probably don't need to lie to. I'm hiding alcohol. It got so bad, my wife at the time, which I'm not married to her anymore. That was an interesting story too. I was married to her until I was about 6 years sober, and then she started having an affair with the man I was sponsoring. And after a while, I quit sponsoring him. We learned love and tolerance here, and I tried, but it didn't work. Anyway, so I'm married to this woman, and my drinking had gotten so bad I was no longer allowed to drink in public, because I couldn't drink in public without being in a fight. I was just always in a fight, and it was never your fault. I looked for it. I looked for trouble, and if there was no trouble happening, I just made trouble happen, because I was so unhappy and so angry in my life. I was just, every time I got drunk in public, I was in trouble. So I wasn't allowed to drink till I got home. She thought that might be a solution for me, so I couldn't make it home. In the mornings, I would start with brandy in my coffee just to get unsick enough that I could eat and get a shower and get dressed and go to work. And at noon, I would run an errand every day, and what I'd really do is find a place where I could get 2 tall cans of Coors Light, and I'd slam them, and then I would try to brush my teeth and use mouthwash and get back to work without anybody noticing. And nobody ever said anything to me. I don't know if they noticed or not, and then at 5 o'clock when I was off, and 5 o'clock and 12 seconds, I was trying to get my hand on some booze. But if I came home with beer on my breath, or with alcohol on my breath, I mean, it would be the battle from hell that night. So I figured out, if I started drinking non-alcoholic beer, like O'Doul's, and I don't know what they call the rest of them, but there were a few of them back then. And if I came in with that on my breath, she wouldn't know. So I would go to the store after work, and I would buy 2, 3, 4 cans of tall beer, and I would just drink it down as quick as I could and throw the beer cans away at the convenience store. And I'd buy a 6-pack of non-alcoholic beer. And when I'd walk in the house, I'd be drinking one of those because it smelled like beer. And she wouldn't know. And she never could figure out how I got so drunk on those. But, in the beginning, I don't know if you're like me, but in the beginning when I was young and I started drinking heavy, I could drink for days. And I could just drink everybody on the side. You could just drink and drink and drink. And I never seemed to get to where I couldn't function. And as it progressed, though, through time, it got where I could drink less and less. And I would get drunk. And at the end, like the first drink or the second drink I would have, I would be slurring my words and I couldn't keep my balance. Now, my mind wouldn't be drunk yet, but my body started getting drunk almost immediately. I was just I assume I was so saturated with alcohol that it just didn't take much to get me there. So I ran around sneaking around every way I could find to figure out the drinking, like our book talks about. And eventually I had cut a deal with her that I was going to drink 2 drinks a night. I love blackberry brandy, so I was going to have a little glass of blackberry brandy and a tall beer, ice cold beer to chase it. And that's all I was going to drink. Now, she didn't know I was drinking on the way home, coming in with my deer beer. But I realized very quickly that I had negotiated a bad deal. So I renegotiated that deal to 4 drinks, 2 brandies and 2 beers. And so I started doing that, and I knew I couldn't renegotiate. So I started with the small glass, and then after a week or so, I just got a bigger glass. And after a week or so, I was drinking brandy out of a tea glass. And I remember the first time I saw her with this problem, because I had my little bar set up in my kitchen and my little refrigerator with the beer in it. And I had this glass, I don't know how big it was, but it was a tea glass, like you go to a cafe and get a sweet tea. It was like a tea glass. And I filled it up with brandy, and I got my beer. And I turned around, and she was looking at me with those Al-Anon eyes, you know, that pierce right through your whole body. And I said, what? 1, 2. And I turned around and walked away, and I just went and sat in my chair, which is where I lived when I was home. I lived in my chair. I wasn't allowed in the bed anymore. I didn't go in the bedroom anymore. I just drank and passed out in my chair. And 4 or 5 hours later, I'd wake up, and I'd be shaking so bad I couldn't function. And I'd go in the kitchen, and I would just uncork that bottle, and I'd drink as much as I could choke down. And I'd go sit in my chair, and the shakes would stop. And I'd sleep for a couple hours, and then I'd wake up and it'd happen again, and I'd do it again, and then I'd pour brandy in my coffee and then go to work. And I just did the best I could. By noon it was, and that went on for the last, I don't know, 6 months or a year that I drank. And then finally I couldn't do it anymore. And when I found out that he had hung himself, I thought, you know, he was drinking like this back then, and this is where it got him. So if I'm drinking that way now, that's probably where it's going to get me. Just a matter of time before I'm going to be hanging myself, which I would not have done. I really think that, you know, especially you guys who know more about drugs than I do, I just think that's a tough way to go, you know, shooting yourself or hanging yourself when you know, I just find a lot easier way to do that. But I knew that that was probably going to be my destiny, was killing myself if something didn't change. So I finally decided that, and my youngest son, who I told you that was killed 7 years ago, he was just born then. And I thought, you know, I had a daughter from another marriage that I drank up. And now I have a son with this marriage. I'm getting ready to drink him up. And I just didn't want to be a bad dad. I didn't want to be a horrible husband. I didn't want to be bad anything. I wanted to be good. And I knew I had it in me, but I couldn't figure out why in the hell I couldn't quit drinking like that. And I just couldn't. And people said to me all of my life, they said, Michael, your problem is drinking. And if you'll stop drinking, your life will get better. And I tried it, and they were wrong. Here's what happens to me when I stop drinking. After I quit throwing up every day, and after the shakes stop, and after I can eat and I sleep a couple days, obviously I start feeling better physically. Problem with me, though, is emotionally. After a couple of weeks, I'm not happy anymore. I'm not glad to be sober. I'm just stark raving sober, and sobriety is not acceptable to me. And a few more weeks will go by, or a month, and then I start getting just a little bit irritable. Everything just seems to grate on my nerves. A little more time goes by, and I'm snapping at people and slamming doors and throwing coffee cups again and acting like a crazy person. And before long, I'm poking people in the chest, sober, because I hate sobriety so much I can't stand it. Stopping drinking had no impact on my life at all except to make it completely unbearable. And when I couldn't take it anymore, I'd go have a couple of drinks, and about halfway through my second drink, everything would become perfect again. So I know those people meant well. I know what they were telling me. From the outside, it must look like drinking is my problem, but my case really is different. They don't understand what's wrong with me, because drinking is my solution. It was the only thing that ever made me feel good. The only thing that ever made life acceptable to me. When I drank, everything was perfect. Now, if I could get to that place and stop, I'd be fine. I hear people all the time say, I drank to get drunk. I never drank to get drunk once. I didn't want to be out of control. I didn't want to be throwing up. I didn't want to be crashing cars. What I wanted was that feeling I got halfway through my second drink. I wanted sobriety, or I wanted life to be perfect. That's all I wanted. I didn't need a lot. I just wanted perfection. And alcohol gave me perfection. And if I could have just stayed at perfection, I'd have been fine. Problem is, perfection, if you're like me, you understand, didn't last very long. And after a while, after I drank long enough, I became physically addicted to alcohol because I drank so much for so long that once I started, I'd hit my mark, but there was no stopping after that. My body just couldn't stop. I just kept drinking and drinking and drinking until I, like all of us, ran out of booze, ran out of consciousness or got locked up or whatever happened. You know, I just couldn't stop. Once I started drinking, I couldn't stop. So I finally went to AA because it was just the only thing I could come up with. I had no insurance, couldn't get into treatment. I didn't have any money. I mean, I had a few $100s, but it wouldn't buy you anything like treatment or any kind of sobriety. So I went to AA just because he did. Now, I don't know why, because he went to AA and killed himself. That didn't work for him. I had a cousin who went in out of AA all of my life, never did get sober, wound up drinking himself to death. But for some reason, I thought maybe AA will work. I don't know. And I didn't even think I was alcoholic. I thought, I mean, I know it looked like alcoholism, but they didn't understand what happened to me when I was sober. So I really didn't think I was an alcoholic because I didn't understand it. So I went to AA anyways because I couldn't come up with any better answer. And I just called Alcoholics Anonymous in the phone book. And they told me where our meeting was that night, and I went, and I was so ashamed of myself. You're new and you're sitting here and you think, how has my life come to this? For Christ's sake, you know, I never wanted to be there. I get that because I was so ashamed. I hid my car like a block away, and it was a clubhouse like this up in Kennewick, Washington. And I saw a little group of goody two-shoes, you know, come into their AA meeting, and I just fell in the dark. You know, I fell in behind them, and I just tried to look like I was part of that crowd. And as we were coming up the steps, you know, into the clubhouse, there was a guy greeting us named Dick D. Got to know him very well later, and he's become a good friend of mine. We had the same sponsor, remember? But Dick had big old thick Coke bottle glasses and a cowboy hat on, and real gruff guy. He's shaking everybody's hand as they're coming in. He gets to me, and I think he's just going to think I'm part of the crowd. I didn't realize you guys all knew each other. And so he gets to me, and he grabs my hand, and he's kind of pulling me up the stairs with his hand. Big, strong guy. And he said, "Welcome to AA. Are you new?" And I said, "No." He said, "I don't know how you can tell a newcomer, but, you know, you always can. You can't tell them much, but you can always tell them." He brings me in, and he said, "Why don't you come sit with me, and I'll get you a cup of coffee." So he sat me down at the table, and he went and got me a cup of coffee, which I thought was a very nice thing, because nobody had been nice to me or done anything nice for me in a long time. So he brought me a cup of coffee, and it was the weirdest AA meeting. He, like on the last Sunday of every month, everybody in the entire, like if you're thinking Mobile, the whole Mobile, greater Mobile area, everybody who had a birthday in that last month would all come to the club on the last Sunday, and it was nothing but birthdays. And they'd go to the podium, and their sponsor would hand them a cake, or, you know, hold a cake up. They'd blow the candles out. Everybody would sing a real short song for them, and then they would talk about God and their sponsor and how glad they were to be sober, which I thought was the craziest thing. Why would you celebrate being sober for a year? That just seemed like being sober to me was the most miserable time of my life. Why would anybody be happy about that, for Christ's sake? And then the next person would come up. And these people were dressed very nice. Now, I'm dressed nice tonight because I'm the speaker. But these people were all coming to this meeting, and the women were wearing these beautiful dresses, and people were carrying balloons, and they had wrapped packages, presents, and, you know, the men were wearing sport coats. It was just a big event. And I had no idea that was an AA, but Dick, he sat next to me, and after a while, he could tell this whole thing was odd to me. And he said, "Listen, come back tomorrow night, and I'll meet you here, and we'll have another meeting." And it'll be a regular AA meeting, because this is not a regular meeting. So I watched this go on for the whole hour. And then we left. And I came back the next night because I was curious what an AA meeting was. And I have no idea what was said in that meeting, but it did not, nobody inspired me. I'll promise you. There's nothing I heard in that meeting that made me think maybe you people understand and maybe you could help me. That did not happen. And if you're in a meeting ever and you're talking in a meeting, the whole idea of being in a meeting, I don't know why I'm going to say this, and I probably, because I get to get on an airplane and leave. So I don't have to take any shit off you tomorrow for saying it. But the whole idea about being in a meeting is not to sit in a meeting and bitch about your life over and over and over in big groups, hoping that'll solve some problem, because that doesn't do anything but make it worse. That doesn't help anybody, including the person, especially the person doing it. The idea of a meeting is to say something with so much depth and weight that you might inspire a newcomer that they might think, maybe you understand and you could help me here, and they will decide to come back and they'll decide to stay. And if you're not inspiring somebody in a meeting, stay home. There's no point in going if you can't do that. That's the point of going to a meeting, unless you're new. And then in case you're new, then, I don't know, be inspired. I was speaking at a meeting not long ago in Prescott, and it was a meeting that everybody hates to talk at. because it's just all treatment centers. None of them want to be there, and they're not happy about it. And they're all on their phones and getting up and smoking and very disrespectful. And so I didn't know how I was going to talk to them because they were a terrible bunch to talk to. But anyway, so I thought I would just try to say something funny. And I said, you know, everybody says that this is a bad group to speak to. And it occurred to me, maybe if you were a better speaker, it wouldn't be such a bad group. And everybody started laughing. I was trying to be funny, but it actually worked out pretty good. But it turns out to be true. If you're a better speaker when you're in a meeting, maybe somebody will want to listen to what you have to say. So think about that when you're sitting in an AA meeting. If there's a new person there, that maybe you could say something that might inspire them and make them think that they could get better here. That's the purpose of this organization. So I go back to my second meeting. Nobody said anything inspiring. I don't know what they said. Maybe they did. I didn't hear anything inspiring. So Dick said, come back another night. And I came back the next night, and Dick wasn't there. And I was really disappointed because I thought he had let me down. He didn't tell me he was going to be there. He just said, come back the next day, and I didn't. So I thought, well, you know, he's no good. And here's another guy that's abandoned me or left me alone. I was in this whole victimization mode. But the meeting was going around the tables, and there was this old timer, 20 years sober then, I came to know later. And he'd been in and out of AA for 10 years before he got sober. So he'd been around AA for 30 years. But it got to him, and he said, listen. And I felt like he was talking to me. And I'm sure all of you have sat in a meeting and felt like somebody was speaking directly to you at some time. And I felt like he was talking to me. But what he said was, if drinking's your problem, stop drinking and your life should get better. But if when you quit drinking, your life gets worse, maybe we can help you. And it was like a banana fell out of my ear. Something was different about what this guy said. Maybe this guy, I'm thinking to myself, maybe this guy really does understand. Now, that was inspiring to me, and I'm quite sure because of that, I would have kept coming to AA meetings because I was intrigued now. I thought, I still confused. I didn't know what's wrong with me, but I thought maybe I understand. So on my way out, I snuck out. You know, I sat in the back, and when the prayers started, I didn't say prayers, and I damn sure wasn't holding hands with anybody. So when that whole thing started, I just headed for my truck, and he caught me before I got there. He said, he kept caught up to me, and he said, hey, do you have a sponsor? And I said, no. I didn't know what sponsor was. He said, do you have a sponsor? I said, no. He said, I'm going to be your sponsor. And I had heard all these birthday people, you know, these goody two-shoes Girl Scouts that were all in there. And I'd heard them talking about sponsors, so I knew it was something that was important. And he said, do you have a sponsor? I said, no. He said, well, I'm going to be your sponsor until you can find one that suits you better. I said, but there's some things you're going to have to do. Can you follow directions? And I lied and said, yes. And he gave me the directions. He said, get a big book. I said, I got one. He said, start reading it and call me every day, and we'll talk about where you are in the book as you're calling me, as you're reading it. So, and then he said, do you believe in God? And I said, no. And if I have to for this to work, this is not going to work for me. If you sneeze, you can't even sneeze now without thinking everybody's going to think you have COVID and scatter, you know. So, but you could sneeze here. It's okay with me, but sneeze that way. Anyways, so he said, do you believe in God? And I said, no. If I have to, this won't work for me. And he said, are you willing to believe in God if I can prove it to you? And I said, well, sure, but you're not gonna. I mean, I was absolutely, I was an atheist. Turns out I never was, ever. I had never heard the word agnostic until I came to AA. I'd never even heard the word. So when they started talking about it in meetings and I got to We Agnostics, he told me to scratch that out in my book and write change your mind. I didn't do that, but he told me to do that. But I started trying to figure out what an agnostic was. And as I learned what that was, I realized that's what I was. I was never an atheist. I was an agnostic. I didn't know if there was any power out there, but the whole thing confused me. I had never gone to church, not once in my entire life. I'd never been in a church service. So the only thing I knew about religion and church, what I saw on TV or heard other people talking about. I didn't know anything about that. So it never occurred to me that there was some God out there that was directing things and that could be part of my life. That wasn't even an option for me. So I just thought the whole thing was just weird. And you guys were just a bunch of, you know, like weak people that needed some fairy tale to carry them through their life or something. That's the way it seemed to me. But life was tough. And if you were going to survive it, you had to fight your way through it, and you had to hold your own. And, you know, that's the way I thought life was about. And so that's what I'd been trying to do. And when it got too tough, I'd just have a couple drinks and cool off a little. And I promise you, if you're new, if I could still do that, if I could still have 2 drinks and everything would be great and it wouldn't set off that craving that just took me down this long road where I couldn't control it and I caused all this problem, I'd still be drinking. You'd have a different speaker tonight. I promise you that. I wouldn't be here. But it didn't work for me anymore, so that's why I got sober. So anyways, he became my sponsor. He said, are you willing to believe in God if I can prove to you? And I said, yeah, but you won't. He said, well, that's just fantastic. He got all excited because I had this big willingness. And I didn't have any willingness, I just tried to get him to quit talking about it. So this man took me through the steps. He took me through the steps in short order. Within 3 weeks, I was making amends to people and actively trying to sponsor people. I was handing my card out to newcomers under his direction. He'd sit in a meeting and have all his babies around him, and he would say, if there were newcomers raising their hands, he would say, I want you to go hand your number to that guy over there, and Michael, you give your number to this guy, and I'm going to give my number to this person here. And so we were directed to do that from as soon as we got through the steps. And so I was doing that. Now, nobody wanted me to sponsor him because why would you? I was crazy. He said I was the angriest newcomer he had ever seen come into AA. And he had been around 30 years, sober 20, last 20. He said I was the angriest newcomer. I don't know if that was true, but I know he believed it. And he believed it up until he died. And he died when I was 13 years sober when he died. And he told me up until that point, he believed that I was the angriest newcomer he'd ever seen. When he told me to write my men's list, I said, what does that mean? He said, just make a list of everybody you're pissed off at or everybody you hate and you don't like. And I said, well, do you have a map of the world? And he said, why? I said, circle the son of a bitch. And I wasn't joking. I just felt that way about everybody. I didn't trust anybody, and I didn't like any of you. I mean, there was nobody that seemed like, and the people doing well, they just seemed suspicious to me. Who could do that? Anyways, he kept working with me, and I got a little better. Here's something interesting about the steps and taking direction from your sponsor. My last sponsor, Clancy, some of you knew Clancy personally, and a lot of you have heard of him, knew who he was. We had him down here to Mobile a couple of times when I lived here, and he just died last month, and he died with 62 years sober. And if he'd have made it to Halloween, just a month later, he had 63 years sober, and he was 93 years old. And probably the greatest AA that I will ever know in my life. And he was just fantastic. And I feel the same way about my first sponsor. They were both just the greatest men I ever knew. And such a great example for me. But Clancy said this about Alcoholics Anonymous. Take away everything. Take away the literature. Take away the clubs. Take away the meetings. Take away the roundups and all of that stuff, which is all great, but it's backdrops to what AA really is. Alcoholics Anonymous is one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic in hopes of reducing their feelings of difference, just enough that they might take an action that they do not believe will work. That is Alcoholics Anonymous, nothing else. Well, I've lived my life sober knowing that was true because Mickey said something, my first sponsor, that made me think maybe this man understands. And because of that, just because of that one little thing, that identification, he started asking me to do things that I didn't believe would work for me. I just did them because I didn't know what else to do, and I had just this tiny little bit of hope that maybe he was right. So I take some action, and the funny thing is, when you take action that's good action, even if you don't believe in it, and you have any sincerity at all, because I didn't have a lot of sincerity, but apparently some, I felt better. That was all, nothing magical. I just did what he told me, and I felt a little better about myself. And then he asked me to do something else. And I was maybe just a tiny bit more willing because it worked out the first time, so I'll do it again. And I did it, and I felt a little better. And then he'd asked me to do something, and before long, that thing had perpetuated until I looked forward to the next action he was going to give me, because every time he did, every time I took an action, I felt better. So I wanted to keep feeling better. And within a very short period of time, I had what I always called a spiritual awakening, this great spiritual awakening. Turns out, looking back on it now, it wasn't true. Well, maybe it was at some level, but it was not really a spiritual awakening. Here's what it was. I did my inventory, shared my inventory with him. I'm driving home. I got about a 40-minute drive home. I'm driving home, and I always claimed I had this massive, big old spiritual awakening. But what I had really, I'm driving home, and for the first time in my life, I felt good. That was all. But I didn't recognize it. I don't know that I had ever felt good about me in my entire life, not once, ever. And that day I drove home and I felt good. And it seemed to me like that you guys must be right. There must be a God for me to feel this great. And all I did was just feel good. And it took a long time for me to realize that's all that happened. But what an amazing thing to happen for somebody like me that you guys could help me just feel good. Now, faith is an interesting thing to talk about. I didn't have any at all. And I remember talking to some people. I would say things like, Dudley, been sober 43 years, and I'd go up to a guy like Dudley and I'd say, I didn't say this to Dudley. Dudley's a good friend of mine. I was going to pick on him because, and have I mentioned Mike Powell yet? Because he said, you know, make sure you make me look good. Now, for those of you who know Mike Powell, that is an impossible task. But he is a very good friend of mine, and I love Mike, and he is a great AA. If you guys know him a little bit, but you don't know him well, I have seen him more mornings than I could count out under that little canopy over there talking with a group of newcomers. And anybody that's working with newcomers, I respect and I love, because if it wasn't for you guys, nobody would have been there for me. So thank you, Mike, and I do value you as a friend and a great AA. Is that okay? That's pretty good. I do mean that sincerely. And you guys can't see Danny. He's on Zoom here. Danny just had a liver transplant. He's trying to get his heart working so he can survive and stay with us for a while. And he loves me, but not enough to come listen to me talk in person.
Wow.
A man that ain't willing to risk his life, you know, to listen to me. I just anyways. So where was I? So I have this, I'm going to talk about faith. So I'm struggling with this. I go to a guy like Dudley and I said, how do you get faith? And he said something to me like, you have to believe. And I said, all right. How do you do that? We got to have faith. And I'm like, what? You have to believe and you have to have faith. And I said, well, how do you get that? And I just kept getting stupid information like that. So if you're new and you don't know if there's a God or you're confused about a God, and I know exactly how you feel, because I thought it was the oddest thing I'd ever heard in my life, this whole God concept. So I was listening to a speaker one time, and you guys can find him if you want. If you get on YouTube and you just type in Joe and Charlie's Big Book Study, it'll come up. And back in the day when I was new, they were traveled around the world giving book studies, and it was the greatest thing ever. And we had a meeting once a week where we just went through Joe and Charlie's book. We'd listen to the tape for 20 minutes, and then we'd talk about it. So I'm listening to that in this book study, and they talked about faith and how you acquire it. And you can't start with faith. And the story they told was like this. Let's say, as an example, I don't know this young man here, but thank you for your military service. That says Navy Hunt. Thank you very much. I was the vice president of the Mississippi State Navy League for 2.5 years. So I got to meet a lot of sailors, and really appreciate your service and all the other military people that are here today, because I know we're free because of you. So if I don't know this man, and he comes up to me after the meeting, he said, Mike, great talk. Can I borrow $20? I'll pay you back next time you're in town. Well, if I gave him that $20, not knowing him or having any experience with him, you would think, I would think you would think, that that was faith. But it is not faith at all. It is hope. The best I can do is hope that he will pay me my money back. Now, if he pays me my money back when he said, and borrows money from me again, pays me back when he says, and this goes on for a period of time, eventually, I'm going to start to believe that he can pay me because I have proof. So I move from hope to belief. Now, this goes on for a while, and one day he's going to come to me. What's your name? Paul. Paul's going to come to me, and he's going to say, Bennett, he borrows money. I'm going to say, listen, Paul, I'm busy. I don't have time for this today. Go to my house. Here's where I hide my money. You take what you need and pay me when you can. Now, get out of here. I'm busy. Now, that's faith. But I can't start there. And AA is exactly the same way. If you're new and all you have right now is hope that maybe this might work for you, that's all you need. Whose phone is ringing? They're calling to talk to me, to apologize for not coming, probably, or zooming in. If you have a little bit of hope that this might work for you, you're in the right place. And if that's the best you can do, you're doing exactly what you need to do. You don't need anything else. That hope, after a while, if you can find somebody that you can identify with that makes you feel like maybe they understand, and you start taking some action that you don't believe in, you might get a little bit of feeling good and then take some more action. And after a while, like me, you will start to believe this thing's really going to work for me. I mean, it could. It could. And then I keep going, and one day I just know that this is always going to work for me. All I have to do is stay the course and do the things I'm doing. Now, there's a lot of people, this is an odd time in Zoom has given people, now Danny has an excuse because he's got a legitimate excuse there. But there's a lot of people that have chosen not to go to meetings anymore because they don't want to catch COVID. And how do you say, well, that's bullshit? You can't say that to somebody because what if they catch COVID? And, you know, I mean, it's a legitimate reason, isn't it? It's the most legitimate reason in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous to stop going to meetings. The most legitimate reason we have ever had. But let me tell you what happens when you stop going to meetings. Nothing bad happens. Isn't that the worst thing you ever heard? And here's how I know it. When I was 13 years sober in Arizona, I got sober in Washington State. 2 years sober, I moved back to Arizona to face the ex-wife. I'd already caught up all the child support and money, but I had to face her and I had to, you know, be present. And I had a daughter there, most beautiful girl you ever saw in your whole life. I know you guys have children, but I have children. My children are so wonderful. So I moved back to Arizona to be a good dad to that little girl. She's just a little girl, you know, and I just ran off and like my brother did. I just ran away from home. And so my wife and I, my next wife, and I moved back to Arizona and I'm there. I'm having her once a week and every other weekend and in the summer and everything I was supposed to have been doing all the time. And I got very active in Alcoholics Anonymous. My sponsor said to me, when you get back to Arizona, I want you to do this. If you go to a new meeting, you're going to think like we do, that you're going to announce yourself and say, my name's Mike Bennett, I'm an alcoholic, and I've just moved to town. And you're going to think that everybody in the room would come up and shake your hand to you and welcome you like we do, but it's not going to happen. You're going to say that. One or two decent AAs are going to come and greet you and do that, and everybody else is going to ignore you. And you're going to feel like it's crappy AA. And then you're not going to want to go to meetings and become part of it. You're going to start judging the differences between that AA and this AA. So I don't want you to be in that position. What I want you to do is this. I want you to go down there and you get to a meeting early and you walk around and shake hands with everybody in that room before that meeting starts, and you tell them who you are and that you are new and that you just moved there. You tell them how long you're sober and whatever else they'll listen to. And you do that at every single meeting you go to. And if you miss one person after the meeting, then you go up. Or if you miss one person, somebody comes in late or somebody's talking to you too much, you miss somebody after that meeting, you go and you meet that person and you shake hands with them. And you do that in every meeting you go to. So I did that. I moved to Prescott, Arizona, and I'm walking around saying, hi, my name is Mike Bennett. I'm an alcoholic, and I just moved here from Kennewick, Washington. And I used to live here, but I got sober up there, and now I'm here. And I'm 2 years sober. And they'll tell you something, and I walk over to the next person, I do it, and the next person. And you know, within a week or two, everybody in Prescott, Arizona knew who the hell I was. And they liked me. Who knew? Just because I was friendly. I didn't have to wait for any of them. I don't know if they would have greeted me or not. I never gave them the chance. Now, I still do that today at every meeting I go to. I try to shake hands with everybody that's there because, hell, I know how that felt when somebody did that for me. You know, it's nice to me. And I know it helps me in my sobriety to do that. So I keep doing that. And if you're not doing that, do that. God damn it. Not that I'm telling you what to do. We don't tell people what to do. So, and he said, get a sponsor when you get there. And I said, I don't want to get a sponsor. I'm happy if you're a sponsor. He said, I don't care what you want. You're going to be somewhere new, and things may or may not be going well for you sometimes. I don't want you calling me on the phone and acting like everything's wonderful and me not knowing. I want some old timer sitting across the table from you that can see the truth, because you can play a pretty good game over the phone. So I did that. I got a sponsor there, and his sponsor was Clancy, and I was about 2 years sober. So I got to meet Clancy when I was 2 years sober, and I got close to him over the years, and he didn't become my sponsor until later. And Mickey just stayed my sponsor. I still called him once a week and checked in with him just because I loved him. He's the first man I truly, other than my foster dad, he's the first man that I truly loved. And I really did grow to love him because I feel like he saved my life. And so I'm going to meetings there, and I start sponsoring people, and I start speaking at meetings, and things are just going well. In about 12 years, about 13 years sober, I left a big job there, and I got a job in Huntsville, Alabama. Big job, paying more money than I ever thought I could ever make in my entire life. And I was so excited about it. And I moved to Alabama, and here's what I'm thinking. It's almost like on the plane, flying to Alabama, thinking, well, you know what? When I get there, I don't have to be as active as I've always been. I don't have to be sponsoring all these guys and answering the phone every day, all day long, and setting up meetings and tearing meetings down and greeting everybody and having commitments here and being a GSR. And I don't have to do all that stuff. There's lots of old timers. Thought of myself as an old timer in the 13 years sober. And there's lots of old timers that don't do that. And they seem to be fine. They just show up at their meeting and they go to the meeting and they leave. And they don't ever have commitments. They don't do anything. They don't seem to sponsor anybody. They just go to meetings and they're fine. I'm going to do that when I get to Alabama. So I got to Huntsville and I started doing that. Here's what happens to me when I stop being active in AA. Eventually, when I don't have any reason to come to the meeting, I start finding excuses. We didn't have COVID. What a great excuse that would have been. I start finding excuses not to go. So instead of going to 3-4 meetings a week and be active, I start going to 2 meetings a week. And then every once in a while, I get busy enough between home and work, I skip a meeting. I just skip a whole week, and nothing bad happens. And then I'll go to a couple meetings because I feel guilty. I got to get back in there and tell everybody. And I still got the guys from Arizona I've been sponsoring calling me, long distance. I've been sponsoring them for a while, and they got some time, so they don't have to get new sponsors there because we're working. So I go 3 weeks out going to a meeting. Then I go to a meeting, but I show up late and I leave early. Don't know anybody there. Pick a meeting that I've never been to before. Then I go a month and not go to a meeting. Then I go to meetings twice a week for 2 weeks, and then I go 3 months and I don't go to a meeting. And it kept getting wider and wider and wider gaps until here I am about 1.5 years sober, not going to any meetings, and depression has set in. And I didn't realize depression had snuck in, but it did. And I started having suicidal thoughts. And I start thinking to myself, something's wrong here. Something's absolutely wrong here. And I just keep doing what I'm doing, and it gets worse and worse. And finally, it gets so bad, I called my wife, and I told her what was going on because I was working out of town, and she cried, and I cried, and she's so terrified because suicidal thoughts are scary, especially somebody that doesn't know us. Very common with us, we don't think so much of it, but terrifying to her. So after she quits crying and everything seems to settle down a little bit, she says, why don't you get a sponsor? Because Mickey had died that year. My first sponsor died. She said, why? And my sponsor that I had locally in Arizona, I just quit calling him when I moved away because I was going to get a new sponsor when I got there. And I just didn't have any sponsorship. And Mickey died, and that's when it really got worse. And so finally, I called Clancy because I was traveling. It didn't matter about a local sponsor. And then I was sober a long time. So I called Clancy, told him what's going on. And he said, send me a letter. Tell me everything that's happened since I saw you last, which had been about 7 years since I'd seen him in person. He said, send me a letter. So I wrote him a long email telling him everything. He said, call me every week. My time to call him is Thursday at 2. That's what you had to have a time to call him in a day. So call me at Thursday at 2 o'clock and go to a meeting every day. When you go to a meeting, tell the truth. Tell them what you did. I thought, that's just mean. He said, tell them what you did. Tell them you quit going to meetings and what happened to you. So I went to a meeting that night. I told the truth, and somebody took me under their wing and started picking me up because I was out of town. They started taking me a meeting every day. This was a guy who had 13 years sober and got drunk. He didn't have 13 years sober, break away, and decide to come back. And I just did by the skin on my teeth, I made it back because this is the hardest thing I ever did, walk into a meeting, admit that a big shot like me had slacked off. And but I went to a meeting every day, had the best sponsor in the world, best sponsor in the history of AA. Went to a meeting every day, and I told the truth. And about 6 months in, I'm not getting any better. And I had moved down here by then. I was living in Mobile, and I wasn't feeling much better. And some of you guys knew me back then, a few of you. And I told Clancy one time, I said, Clancy, I don't even believe the bullshit that I say in meetings anymore. I used to believe it, but it just doesn't feel the same. It's like I don't own it anymore. And he said, I don't give a goddamn what you believe. You sat in those meetings and you tell those newcomers what you used to believe, and I don't want to hear that shit again. He hung up on me. And I thought, well, you're just a mean old son of a bitch, And so I was doing that. I kept going to meetings. I come down here to this club. I go to meetings. I tell them, and I wasn't getting any better. And finally, I'm sitting in here one day, and some newcomer, a habitual slipper, somebody that just gets sober for a few months and gets drunk, gets sober for a few months, gets drunk. And every time they come back, they got this whole story about how this time it's different. And then they start preaching about AA and how good it works and everything. And I'm sitting there listening to them. And I mean, you don't have a sponsor, obviously. It seems like he doesn't have a sponsor. He's just running off his mouth about shit that's never worked for him, that he doesn't even do. I'm thinking to myself, sitting in a meeting, why don't somebody tell that guy to shut up? I don't know what I would have said, but that's what I'm thinking. Just tell that son of a bitch to shut up, because I'm sick of listening to it. And I'm just pissed off, sitting in this meeting, and I got to listen to this crap. And what you saw was this. I'm sitting in the meeting smiling. That's what's going on in my head. But anyways, meeting's over. I'm standing at that coffee pot over there, and I'm getting a cup of coffee, and this guy comes up. I don't even know who he was. He come up, he's just yapping in my ear and yapping in my ear. Finally, I said to him, you have a sponsor? He said, no. And I said, well, go over there, because we had books on the shelf there. I said, go over there and get a book and meet me out on this patio that we're standing on now, and I'm going to be your sponsor, because I'm sick of listening to you. Now, that's what I said. I have no idea what I actually said to him. I imagine I was probably kind and, patient or whatever. But in my head, that's what I said to him. So he comes out here and sits there. I finish my coffee, and I'm just dreading talking to this stupid son of a bitch, But I come out, and I sit here on the bench with him, and he opens the big book, and we start talking about the big book. Hell, he probably knew it better than I did. He'd been around so long. But we start talking about the big book, and I tried to help him understand what I learned when I was new. That the first 3 steps are just so simple. You just got to give up on drinking and give up on being sober. That's all you got to do. Just surrender. If drinking was good for you, you'd still be doing it. If sobriety was good for you, you wouldn't need us. But if neither one of them are working and you're here, the first 2 steps are already done. And the third step is just making a decision to join us and stay. Keep doing what we're doing. That's all there is to it. Clancy used to say that the first 3 steps have killed more alcoholics than anything in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. That almost sounds like AA blasphemy, doesn't it? But think about all of the workbooks there are for doing the first step. And think about all the things that, the different ways to do the second step and the third step. And what's interesting is when Bill Wilson, this little history lesson here, when Bill Wilson sent the manuscript out for our book, people called him and sent him letters and said something in consensus. They said something like this: Bill, we didn't do any of this shit, and neither did you. The first 70 to 100 people that got sober didn't do the first 3 steps the way they're outlined in the big book. Isn't that an interesting thing to learn? What they did was just surrender. They gave up and finally said, I don't know what's out there, and I don't care. I can't do it anymore. And the AAs got them and started helping them. And where did they put them into action? What was the first thing they had them do? Had them write an inventory. So I sat out here with that man, and I explained to him, don't make too big a deal out of the first 3 steps. You've either done them or you're gonna. But right now, let's get to work. Get that behind you and just chalk it up as an action taken. And let's write an inventory. And I gave him the instructions to write an inventory. I said, now I'm going to go out of town for a few days. I want you to call me every day. And when I get back, we're going to do your 5th step, okay? And we left that meeting, just a wonderful meeting with me in the show. Man, I wish I knew who he was. And if you're here, he might be sitting here. He said, it didn't go anything like that, you crazy bastard. You really were an asshole to me and all that. I have this idea that I was very kind and loving during that. So if you're here, just please don't, approach me after the meeting and change my mind. Anyways, so we had that little session there, and I get in my car to drive home. I was living down by Dolphin Island at the time. I get my car to drive home. And for the first time in a year, since I started all that crap and tried to get back in AA, remember, I'm going to a meeting every day. I got the best sponsor in the history of AA, and I'm not getting better. For the first time in a year, I drive home feeling like $1 million. Feeling like $1 million. And I realized on that drive home that going to meetings every day wasn't enough for me. Having the best sponsor in the world was not enough for me. What was missing in my life is giving of myself for free and for fun with no price tag. Just doing something for somebody else with no price tag on it just to try and help. And from that moment to this moment, I've never stopped doing that. Now, here's something interesting I've learned. I know we're running out of time here. You're thinking, shit, we're way over time. So shut up. I'm almost done. So I realized that not only did I need to do that, I needed to do that a lot. Now, maybe I'm sicker than most people because I was right before. There are people who go to AA and do nothing. They contribute 0. They just show up at their meeting once a week or twice a week. They don't help anybody with anything. They share about their life and they go home and they seem to be happy and fine. And I don't judge that. If you're well enough to be able to do that and stay sober and be happy with your life, please keep doing it and don't listen to me. But I'm sicker than most people. I must be, because that made me sicker. And I told you how I got. So I started working with new people. And I didn't sit around like so many of us saying, God, I wish somebody would come ask me to sponsor them. I'd sponsor people, but nobody ever asks me. I'm glad Bill and Bob didn't think that. We'd all be dead. Bill and Bob were sitting around, our co-founders, they were sitting around thinking, you know, Bill, Bob said to Bill, you know, Bill, we're doing pretty good. But if we don't get to work and find us somebody to work with, I don't know if this thing's going to stick. And Bill said, me either. Where do we go? He called the hospital and said, hey, Bob did. He called the hospital he worked at, and he said, hey, I got a solution, I think, for alcoholism. And they said, have you tried it on yourself? And I imagine he said, yes, you smart ass. But what we need is we need a new person to try it out on, you know, see if we can help them. You got anybody? And they said, oh, yeah, we got a live one, you know, knocked out a couple, black in the eyes of a couple nurses, and we're getting strapped down over here. They said, well, do whatever Bob said to do to him, give him some booze or whatever, get him kind of detoxed, and we'll come up in a day or two and we'll see him. And they did, and he got sober after a couple visits from them. And then they told him, now it took him through the steps right away, and then they told him, now you got to help us go find somebody new, or you won't stay sober. Not to get them sober, you got to go find somebody new, or you won't stay sober. And then they did that, and they kept telling people, you do these steps, and then you got to go help somebody new, or you won't stay sober. We don't care about them. You won't stay sober if you don't do it. So that finally sunk in when I was sitting on the deck with that guy out here that day, and I drove home feeling like $1 million. I've got to find those people to work with so I can stay sober. And don't sit around waiting for somebody to ask you to sponsor them, for Christ's sake. I mean, I got to quit telling people what to do. Anyway, so I walk up to newcomers and I introduce myself and I ask them the same question. Harvey's seen me do it a million times. I ask the same question. Do you have a sponsor? If you tell me no, I'm going to offer. You know, I'm willing to be your sponsor if you want some help. And I've got a lot of practice with this. I might be able to help you. If you find somebody later, it works out better for you, you can fire me, no hard feelings. But if you need a sponsor now, I'm willing to help you. And I've been doing that from that time until this time. Now, I sponsor a lot of people now. I still sponsor several people from Mobile in this area that still call me every week. Rob's one of them. Rob calls me every Thursday, and he calls me right before I call Clancy. He calls me at 1:30 my time, and I call Clancy at 2, and sometimes he talks too long, and I'm thinking, shit, hurry up, because I got to call Clancy, but Clancy's dead now, so I got a new sponsor. But anyway, so I leave here, and I take a job up in Meridian, Mississippi. Well, you know, I didn't know a lot of people in Meridian, and after a while, you know what happened to me? I'm going to meetings every day. I'm meeting people. I'm shaking hands with everybody. But you know what happened to me? I started getting a little depressed up there. I started having suicidal thoughts, just mild. I wasn't going to kill myself, but I was thinking about it. I just was unhappy with life. And I kept pushing and pushing. And Dudley works at a place where they have treatment and for meetings down in the basement. And I just hated that meeting. Nobody wanted to be there. And they're all talking during the meeting and just shitheads, you know, all of them. But all the good meetings didn't have any new people there. So I started going there, you know, and I'd listen to those disruptive, disrespectful people. And after the meeting, I'd walk up and say, hi, I'm Mike Bennett. Do you have a sponsor? And I started sponsoring some people up there. And half a dozen guys later, I'm starting to feel better. All of a sudden, I'm well. A few years go by, and we sell out there, and I moved back home to Arizona because my wife said, you know, we got a bunch of grandbabies out there growing up. Let's move back there. And, you know, we already had a home there, and we were planning on retiring there anyway. I moved back home. You know what happened? I wasn't sponsoring any new people. Now, by this time, I couldn't tell you how many people I'm sponsoring that are calling every week and checking in, but they have time. And they don't do enough for me. I must be sicker than most people. I need more work than just that, just going to meetings and the old timers calling me. I get to Prescott, same thing after a while. I'm kind of depressed. But I start recognizing the pattern now. And I realized immediately, I'm fine. I just need to go find some new people to sponsor. So I started doing that. And now I just sponsor anybody that I can get to stand still. And I've been there long enough now, actively sponsoring people, that now people come up to me all the time and ask me if I'll be their sponsor. And you know what I say? I always say yes. You know why I always say yes? Some people say, well, I can only take on 2 or 3. Bullshit. Well, let me rephrase that. I understand. If you take them through a 2-month or 3-month or 6-month monologue on, workbooks and shit and how you take them through the steps, I could understand the workload on you. But if you take them through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, by 1 week, I have them writing an inventory, and that's only because I meet with them 1 day a week. The first time I meet with them, and I give them the instructions on their inventory, just like I did sitting right there. The next week, I listen to their inventory. They leave my car having done their 5th, 6th, and 7th step, and they've started their 8th. I meet them the next week, and we go over their 8th step and get them started making amends, get them through their 10th and 11th, and I tell them, you are not going to stay sober and be happy if you don't find somebody new to work with. So start giving your number out to everybody that will stand still for it. And they're not going to want you to sponsor them. I wouldn't, because you got to give them hope. But eventually, you'll be sober enough to be attractive enough to somebody that they'll want you to, and you just make the effort, and you'll be fine. But don't stop making the effort. And then what do I do with them then? They don't take up a lot of time, do they, Chris, at that point? So I try to find somebody new to work with. And if I'm not doing that 3-4 times a week, if I'm not meeting with people, I just don't feel good enough about myself. Now, maybe the rest of you don't need to do that. Maybe I'm sicker than the rest of you, and that's okay. You don't have to compare you to me. You have to compare you to the you used to be. How are you doing compared to you 5 years ago? That's the only comparison you have to make. I know for me and from my experience, if I'm not working with new people, I don't get better. And you really can't coast here. I thought you could. Turns out you can't. You're either going to be doing the work and getting better, or you're not going to do the work and you're going to get worse. And if you get worse and worse and worse, you may make it back, you may not make it back. So my advice to you is work all 12 steps, which means when you get through that inventory process and that amends process, you're making amends, go find somebody new to work with. Try to give it back and be helpful. When I'm helpful for free and for fun, God, what a blessing my life is. Today, my life is so good that I absolutely wouldn't trade it with anybody in the world. Nobody in this world would I trade my life. Now, when my son was killed 7 years ago, my first thought, I was up in Corinth, Mississippi. My first thought was I got the phone call. I know he's okay. I know he's with God, and I know he's okay. And those of you that were here with me know that that was true for me. You know what my second thought was, though, I think far more important? The boy who murdered him the year before had sat at my kitchen table or my dining room table and had dinner with our family. You know what my second thought was? I wonder how badly that boy must have been hurting to take an action that severe. I knew my son was with God and he was okay. And that's not bad for a boy that never went to church and didn't have any faith. I knew he was with God and he was fine. But the most important thing I learned from that is I had compassion for the boy who committed the crime. And I know that boy's okay too. I know he probably missed the lesson in this class and he may have to do a little catch-up work to get back, to get caught up, but I know he's okay. And I have to imagine that God was holding all those kids in his hand when they died, and he had to say to all of them, you're a good boy. And there was a girl killed too, and you're a good girl, and you're all going to be fine. And then they just moved them to the next class and let them keep learning. One of these days, it is very likely that that boy, just like us, we've done some rotten things in our lives, all of us, that we think we can't get past. But eventually, they become our strongest asset. They become the thing that makes us most valuable to everybody else in our lives and everybody else in the world. The things we did that were rotten, the things we did that we look at as mistakes. But now you could become, if you use that wisely and stay sober, you could become a spiritual leader for countless others. I think the same thing about that boy. I think that that boy, from what he had done in his life as he moves from class to class in the spiritual growth, one day might be the spiritual leader for the rest of us. God loves me and God loves you absolutely without exception, and it's fair. There's never been anything more fair in the history of anything. I want to say life, but even bigger than that. God's love is the most fair thing there ever was. So I hope all of you have not froze to death. I appreciate you being so patient and listening to me, and I love all of you. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Sorry about the dog. I guess he wanted to be a part of the meeting. He might be one of us.
Knew I was over.
Did he even knew you were over time? All right, wonderful. Hey, we're going to close in our usual manner with the Lord's Prayer that all care to join us. Again, let's put our hands together for Mike and thank him for coming and speaking with us tonight. Also, we've got pizza and refreshments if y'all want to stick around, so please join us in fellowship. That'd be great. All right. Mike, you want to do this honor of taking us in prayer?
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Keep coming back. It works if you work it.
Bye, Danny.